The shredder at Currick ran on Fridays, and on Fridays the birds went somewhere else. You could set a clock by it. 7 in the morning, Sam Ollerenshaw threw the gantry breaker and the hammer mill spun up, and for about 90 seconds you heard only the motor, a low sound that came up through your boots before it reached your ears. Then the first car went in, and the sound changed to something that had teeth. Whole vehicles went in one end of that machine and came out the other as fist-sized knots of metal on a belt. And the magpies that lived in the sugar gums along the river fence lifted off in one body and did not come back until knockoff. I worked at Currick Reclamation for 26 years. I ran the weighbridge and I ran a torch, and in the wet season I ran a broom, because 40 acres of clay flat holds water like a dinner plate, and every low corner of that yard turned to soup between November and March. Ray Kessick owned the place. He was not a bad man, and he was not a sentimental one, and the two facts fit together in him without any friction at all. He gave me a job when I was 32 with nothing to my name but a trade certificate and a bad reference, and he never once asked me about the reference, and in return I never once asked him why the shredder was in his name and the land was in his wife's. The yard sat inside a bend of the Currick, 40 acres of graded clay with the river on 2 sides and the road on the third. In summer the ground cracked into plates you could lift with a boot. In winter it lay under 2 inches of brown water and the tire ruts became canals, and the whole yard smelled of diesel and wet rust, and the particular sweetness that comes off a stack of old radiators when the rain hits them. Everything in that yard was passing through. That was the thing about the work that people outside it never understood. A breaker's yard is not a graveyard. Nothing is buried. A car comes in and it sits in a row with its number chalked on the windscreen, and in 6 weeks or 6 months it goes to the mill and comes out as a knot of steel and gets on a truck and goes to a furnace and becomes something else. Reinforcing bar, a washing machine, another car. The yard is a waiting room. Everything in it has an appointment. Everything except Lot 44. I want to be careful here because I have told this a few times now, and every time I tell it I catch myself trying to make it sound like I knew. I did not know. That is the whole of it. If I had known, it would not have been me. Lot 44 came into the yard in the winter I turned 47. It came on a low loader from a defense disposal auction 3 states away, and it came with 4 pages of paperwork that said almost nothing. The manifest called it unidentified alloy mass, non-ferrous, non-cuttable, no salvage value assessed. It had been through 6 owners in 40 years, and the last of them had paid Currick a fee to take it off his hands, which is a thing that happens perhaps twice in a decade. Scrap has a price. Scrap that you pay to get rid of is not scrap. It is a problem with a shape. Its shape was this: 11 meters long, a little over 2 meters at its widest, tapering at both ends but not evenly. One end came to a blunt rounded point, and the other flared and squared like the stern of a working boat. Its skin was a dull gray that took no shine and no dirt, and if you put your hand on it in July it was cold, and if you put your hand on it in January it was cold, and I mean the same cold, the exact same. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather and never changed. It had one long seam that ran nose to stern along its upper curve, hair fine, so fine you could not get a fingernail into it, and when it rained the water pooled in that seam and sat there in a long thin line like a spirit level. Ray had it craned off the low loader into the back corner of the yard, in the flat between the drum store and the river fence, and it lay there in the mud on 2 hardwood sleepers, and it never moved again while I worked there. Toby Ardern called it the boat. He was 24 when this happened, and he came to the yard at 19 with a tattoo he regretted, and a father who had told him he would not last a month. He called it the boat because that is what it looked like, in the way that a coffin looks like a boat, and I never corrected him, and after a while I called it the boat too when I was talking to him, and I called it Lot 44 in the ledger, and when I was alone with it I did not call it anything. Men had tried to cut it. That was written on it. You did not need any special knowledge to read the record. You only needed to have worked a yard. There was a torch scar near the blunt end, about the size of a saucer, where somebody had held an oxy flame long enough to discolor the skin. Not melt it, discolor it. The gray there was a slightly different gray, the way a callus is a slightly different skin. There was a drilled dimple on the flank, less than a millimeter deep, with a spiral of hardened swarf still fused to the rim, which told you the bit had gone soft and smeared before the surface had done anything at all. There was a straight bright line on the underside, where a diamond wire saw had been run across it. The wire had worn through in 4 passes and left a polished stripe on the alloy, the way a razor leaves a shine on a strop. There was a stenciled number in white paint on the flank, half worn, from a laboratory in another country, and beneath it a second stencil, and beneath that the ghost of a third. Somebody, somewhere, had condemned it 3 separate times, in 3 separate hands, and each time somebody after them had condemned it again. And on the flared end, there was a place where the skin was not scarred and not stenciled and not drilled, an area about the size of a dinner tray, and after 11 years I still could not tell you what was different about it, only that when you ran your palm across it your hand slowed down. Nobody cut it because it could not be cut. It went into the yard's dead ledger with all the other things that could not be cut and could not be sold, and there it sat with a number on it, and Ray forgot it, and the crane crew forgot it, and the tax man never asked. That happens. Every yard has 3 or 4 things like it. A locomotive bogie too heavy for the crane. A concrete counterweight nobody wants. A pressure vessel with no plate on it, which no scrap merchant will touch because he cannot prove what it held. But once a year, at stocktake, somebody has to walk the dead ledger with a clipboard and put a mark against every line, and for 11 years that somebody was me, because I ran the weighbridge, and the weighbridge is where the paper lives. The dead ledger had a column headed status. There were 3 things you were meant to write in it: scrap, sold, OWNED. I never wrote any of them against lot 44. Every year I wrote the same word, in pencil, in my own hand. Held. Ray saw it once in the 4th year, and he looked at it for a long moment with his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead and his thumb on the page. That's not one of the words, Merritt. No. What's it mean? It means it's here, I said. It doesn't mean it's ours. He looked at me the way a man looks at a dog that has done something clever and slightly annoying. Then he put his glasses down and signed the bottom of the page and went and had his lunch. The next year the same. The year after the same. 11 times I wrote that word, and 11 times a man who did not care signed under it, and I have thought since that the whole of it turned on those 2 facts standing side by side, that I meant it, and that nobody else cared enough to stop me. I did one other thing. In the wet standing water sits in that seam. It sits there for weeks because the seam is a hair's width and the water goes in and does not come out. Now I have spent my working life around metal, and I will tell you the first commandment of it, the one you learn in the first fortnight of any trade. Water does not hurt a thing quickly. Water hurts a thing patiently. Standing water in a seam is how you lose a boat. It is how you lose a chassis rail, a gutter, a bridge. It is not the flood that takes a thing. It is the little bit that stays. So on wet mornings, before the mill spun up, I took the yard broom down to the back corner and I put the bristles flat against that seam, and I ran them the length of it, nose to stern, and the water came off in a sheet and ran down the gray flank into the mud, and then I went and clocked on. 6 minutes, call it 8 in a bad week, 11 years. Toby asked me why in his 2nd winter. He had come down with me because he was avoiding Sam, who wanted him to grease the gantry rails. Why do you bother? It's not going anywhere. That's why. It doesn't rust, Merritt. It doesn't do anything. You could pour acid on it. Somebody probably has, I said. And swept. He watched me finish and he said, not unkindly, you know it's just a lump. I know it's just a lump, I said. I don't know that it's only a lump. Nobody's ever told me what it is. Till somebody tells me what it isn't scrap. It's a thing in my yard with water in it. That was the whole of my position. I want to be honest about how small it was. It was not faith. It was not a feeling that something waited inside. I had no feeling of that kind, and I have never had one since about anything. And if I had had one, I would have kept it to myself. Because in that yard, a woman does not say that sort of thing out loud unless she wants to hear about it for a decade. It was only that I had spent my life cutting things up, and the cutting is a door that opens once. You can take a car apart. You cannot untake it apart. Everything in the trade runs one way, from a thing to material, and once you have made that pass, you have made a decision on behalf of everyone who ever comes after you, and you have made it forever, and you have usually made it in about 40 seconds with a torch in your hand and your mind on the T-brake. So you do not make it until you know. That is all. That is not philosophy. That is just how you keep from being a fool. Ray sold the yard in the September. He was 71 and his knees were finished and his wife wanted the coast, and a consolidator called Prentice Marr came out from the city in a clean vehicle and walked the rows with him for 2 hours, and by the end of the week there was a sign on the fence with a different name on it. The staff got a fortnight's notice and a letter. Sam had 11 years and got the same letter as Toby, who had 5. That is the trade. They were going to run the mill flat out for the last month and then sell the mill itself. Everything went. Everything on the ground, everything in the dead ledger, everything with a chalk number and everything without one. The tires went to a burner. The batteries went in a container. The concrete counterweight was broken up with a hydraulic hammer over 4 days, and the locomotive bogie was cut into 6 pieces by a hired crew with a lance the length of a fence post. I watched them do the bogie. It took them a day and a half and they were good at it, and when it was done, there was nothing on the ground where it had been except a dark stain and a few chips of steel in the clay. Marr came to the weighbridge on the Tuesday of the last week with a folder. He was maybe 40, and he was polite in the way that costs nothing, and he had the folder open on my counter before he had finished saying good morning. He had a pen with a heavy barrel. I remember the pen better than the face. Lot 44, he said, the alloy mass. The boat. He smiled at that. The boat. It's not on the sales schedule. It's in the dead ledger with a status of a. He turned the folder around so I could read my own pencil, held. That's right. That's not a status. Legally, that's not anything. I've got a shredder feed schedule and a hauler booked, and I've got to be able to say who's disposing of that item and under what right. It can't be shredded, I said. It won't go through the mill. It'll break your hammers. Then it goes on a truck to a furnace and it's somebody else's hammers. Either way, I have to be able to point at a line and say that was owned and it was disposed of. Nobody can find a title on it. There's no lien on it. There's no consigner. 6 owners, no paper, and the last one paid you to take it, which under the act is an abandonment. He tapped the folder twice with one finger. Abandoned goods on a commercial yard vest in the yard after 12 months. It's been 11 years. Mrs. Keswick sold me the yard and everything in it. It's mine. But my lawyer wants a name on the line where it says who claimed it, because in 11 years nobody ever did. He turned the folder around again and there was a form, and there was a line, and the line said claimant. You've been the custodian, he said. You've signed the stocktake every year. Put your name there and I'll date it and we'll all go home. I looked at that line for a while. What happens then? Then on Friday it goes on the low loader, and the day after that it goes in a bath at 1100 degrees, and whatever it is, it's an ingot. He shrugged, and it was not a cruel shrug. It was the shrug of a man who has an appointment at 2. Merit, it's a rock. It's been a rock for 40 years. Somebody has to be the one who signs, or it just sits there and it becomes my problem instead of nobody's problem, and I'd rather it was a line in a folder. Why do you need my name? Because you're the only person who ever wrote anything against it, he said, and my lawyer says that's custody, and custody plus abandonment plus time equals title. You have owned it legally for a decade. You just never said so. He put the pen on the counter with the barrel across the line, the way you set a place at a table. And I sat there in the Weybridge hut with the rain starting on the tin above me, and I understood, in a plain and unremarkable way, that if I wrote my name on that line, I would be doing the one thing I had spent 11 years not doing. I said, "I'll think about it." He said, "Think until Thursday," and he was not unpleasant about it, and he took his folder and left, and I watched his clean vehicle go up the Hall Road with the rain coming behind it across the flats, and then I got the broom and went down the back. I have gone over that week many times, and here is what I noticed and what I made of it at the time, which was nothing. On the Tuesday, when I swept the seam, the water came off it warm. Not hot, warm the way a windowsill is warm. I stood there with the broom and I put my hand flat on the skin, and it was the same cold it had always been, and I picked up a handful of the water off the sleeper and it was warm in my palm, and I decided I had been leaning on the broom handle and my hands were flushed. On the Wednesday the rain came in hard from the southwest, and the yard flooded to the ankles in the low corners, and at 4 in the afternoon Sam came into the Weybridge hut soaked through and said, "Your boat's dry." "What?" "The back corner's under, everything's under. There's a foot of water round the drum store." He wiped his face with the flat of his hand. "The boat's sitting on wet sleepers and the sleepers are in the water and the boat's dry. Not wet, dry. I put my hand on it. It's non-porous, Sam." "I know what non-porous is," he said. "There's rain falling out of the sky, Merritt. It's not landing on it." We went down and looked. The rain was coming across the flats in gray sheets, and it was falling on the drum store and on the sugar gums and on us, and it was falling on lot 44 and it was running off it, and there was a difference between those two things that I could see and could not name. The water was not beating on the skin. It was not sheeting either. It came down and it was off, at once, the way a thing falls off a table, and the seam along its back was the only place any water lay at all, a long thin line of it, still and level, and the rain that fell into that seam stayed. Toby said, "It's keeping it." "Keeping what?" "The water in the crack. It's letting that stay and it's throwing the rest off." He laughed and then stopped laughing. "That's mad. Why would a rock do that?" We stood in the rain and got wet, and after a while Sam said it must be a static thing, an electrical thing, and Toby said his phone had gone stupid, and I took the broom off my shoulder and put the bristles in the seam and ran it the length, and 11 meters of water came off the back of that thing and went into the mud, and the seam sat empty and hair fine and gray, and nothing happened at all. We went and had our tea. On the Thursday, I found Toby down there on his own, kneeling on the wet sleeper with his ear against the flared end. He got up fast, the way a young man does when he is caught, and he did not look at me and he said, "You can hear the mill through it. You can hear the mill through everything." "No," he rubbed his ear. "You can hear the mill before it, about a second before. I've been sat here since it started up. It hums, then the mill starts." He looked at me and his face was doing something I had not seen it do. "Merritt, it's listening to the yard. It's an alloy mass and it's resonating." "Yeah," he said, "that's what I said to myself." We stood there for a while and neither of us went anywhere. And then he said the thing that I have not been able to put down since, and he said it looking at the mud and not at me, in the flat voice a young man uses when he is asking a question he thinks is stupid. "Do you reckon anyone's ever just left one alone?" I said, "Left one what alone?" "One of these," he nodded at it. "There's got to be more than one, something that size 40 years. 6 owners and every single one of them did the same thing. Cut it, drill it, saw it, then get rid of it, and you can see all of it, it's all still on there. It's like a—" he stopped and started again. "It's like a school desk. Everyone who sat there carved their name in it." He shrugged. "Just makes you think nobody's ever just left it." "I've left it," I said. "Yeah," said Toby, "for 11 years, and on Friday it goes in a furnace, so what was that worth?" He did not say it to hurt me. He said it because he was 24 and about to lose a job, and because it was true, and because he had spent a week watching a thing throw off rain and he had nowhere to put that. I went back to the hut and Mars' folder was on my counter with a sticky note on the claimant line, and it said Thurs PLS in blue biro, and I looked at it until the light went. I did not sign it. Instead, I did what I have always done, which is the thing I have to live with now, because it makes me sound wiser than I am. I took my pencil and in the status column of the dead ledger, on the last page of the last stocktake that yard would ever have, I wrote it one more time. Held. And underneath, because I am a coward about paper and I wanted to be understood by whoever came after me, I wrote a sentence in my own hand, in pencil, and it is the only sentence of mine that anyone will ever read. Not mine to cut. Nobody has told me what it is. Then I put the ledger in the drawer, and I locked the hut and I drove home. Friday came up wet and gray and windless, the way the good ones do out there. The rain was not falling so much as standing in the air. The river was up over the lower fence line, and the flats went out to the sugar gums in one flat sheet of pewter, and the whole world had about 4 colors in it, and every one of them was a kind of gray. And there was that light you get in the wet season an hour after dawn, where there is no sun anywhere and no shadow anywhere, and everything is lit from all sides and nothing is bright. I came in at 5:30, an hour early, because the low loader was booked for 8 and I did not want to be at the weighbridge when it went by. I got the broom out of the hut. It was a yard broom with a hardwood head and bristles worn to a slant on the left side from 11 years of being pushed by a right-handed woman, and I have it still, and it is in the shed behind my house, and I am not going to explain that to anyone. I walked down the back through 6 inches of water. There was no mill noise. There was no bird noise. There was the sound of my boots and the sound of the rain on the drum store roof. Lot 44 lay on its sleepers with the water standing all around it and nothing standing on it, and along its back the seam was full, nose to stern, one long line of rain sitting level, and I looked at it for a while in that flat gray light, and I said out loud, in the empty yard, the only stupid thing I said in 11 years. I said I couldn't keep you. And I want to be plain about this. I did not expect an answer. I have never once in my life expected an answer from a thing that had no mouth. I said it the way a man says something to a dog he is driving to the vet. It is not for the dog. Then I knelt down on the wet sleeper, because at 58 you kneel when you can and not when you should, and I laid the broom head flat against the seam at the blunt end, and I ran it the whole 11 meters, nose to stern, and the water came off in a long sheet and went down the gray flank and into the flood. And the seam took light. Not a spark, not a flash. It filled, the way that seam filled with rain, except from the inside, and what came into it was a color I can only call amber, which is a poor word and is not the word, and it ran the length of the seam from the flared end to the blunt end at about the pace of a man walking, and it did not flicker. I stayed on my knees, because my knees had stopped consulting me. The light was warm on the underside of my chin. The flooded yard around me went the color of tea. In the standing water all around the sleepers I could see the seam repeated, upside down, 11 meters of amber lying on the surface of a foot of dirty rain, and I remember thinking, with the part of my mind that keeps working while the rest of it stands still, the water's warm now. That's the second time I should have known on Tuesday. The seam opened. It did not spring or hiss or hinge. The two halves of that gray skin drew apart along the seam the way lips part, 4 inches, no more, and the amber came up out of it into the wet air and hung there, and the rain fell through it, and every drop that passed through that light took the light and carried it down and put it into the flood at my knees. The whole back corner of the yard was warm and gold, and full of falling fire that was not fire, and the drum store 40 feet away was still gray and streaming, and had nothing to do with any of it. Inside the seam there was not machinery. I looked. I have been asked 100 times and I will say it once more. I saw no wires, no lights, no glass, nothing that I could have named from my trade. I saw a depth. I saw the way a well looks when you drop a stone and wait. And down in it, a very long way down and much further down than the 2 meters that thing was thick, there was something pale and long and still, and I did not look at it for more than a moment, and I have never allowed myself to look at what I remember of it for more than a moment, and I am not going to describe it, because I did not see it well enough to describe, and I will not put a lie into a true account. And then the cradle spoke. I say the cradle because that is what it told me it was, later, in the 12 minutes it had. It did not speak out of the seam, and it did not speak in my head, and both of those are the wrong picture. The sound arrived in the way that the smell of rain arrives before rain. It was in the yard, and it was in the water, and it was in the hardwood of the broom handle in my 2 hands, and it was a voice, and it was old, and it was tired in a way that I have only otherwise heard in the voices of men who have sat up all night with someone. It said, "Well found, Salver." I have had 11 years and then some to think about those 3 words, and I have decided that the reason they took the legs out from under me is not that they were strange. It is that they were not. Well found is a term of my trade. It is older than my trade. It is what the sea law says about a wreck. A well-found ship is a sound one, a ship in good order, a ship with nothing missing from her. And a salver is not an owner. That is the whole of the law, and it is the only piece of law I have ever cared about. A salver is the one who comes to a thing that is lost and takes hold of it and keeps it from being lost, and a salver is never the owner. He has a claim on the reward. He has no claim on the ship. He can hold her against wind and water and against every other hand that reaches for her, and the one thing he cannot do, the one thing that ends him as a salver and makes him a thief, is take her for his own. I knelt in the flood with the broom across my knees and I said, "I don't know what you are." And the cradle said, "That is the qualification." It had 12 minutes. It told me so at the front, the way a man tells you when his train goes, and it spent them plainly, and it did not waste any of them being wonderful. There were 940 of them, it said. Cradles. It did not tell me who made them, and I did not ask, and I have come to think that not asking was the last piece of luck in a lucky life. 940, put down on 940 worlds, and inside each one a sleeper who was the last of a people, and every cradle sealed and silent and made of a skin no tool could open, and no fire could spoil. And each cradle sat and waited and refused. Because, and here I am giving you its words as well as I can, and its words were not many, a cradle does not open to strength. It cannot be opened to strength. That is what the skin is for, and the skin is not the lock. The skin is only the answer to the question everyone asks first. The lock is a different question, and the cradle asks it once of every hand that comes, and it asks it in silence, and it waits. The question is, what will you do with a thing you cannot use? And 939 times, on 939 worlds, over 9,000 years, the answer came back the same. They cut. Of course they cut. The cradle was not angry about it, and I want that understood, because when I have told this in a room, the room always wants there to be a villain, and there is not one. They cut because a thing that lies on your ground and cannot be used is an insult to a working people, and because there might be something inside worth having. And because if you cannot open it, you can at least own it, and owning is a thing you prove with a tool. They came with flame, and they came with wire, and they came with pressure and cold and acid, and on some worlds, with weapons I would not know the names of. And when the skin did not give, they wrote a number on it, and they condemned it, and they sold it on to the next hand, and the next hand did the same, and the cradle carried every mark and waited. And then this is the part I did not understand for a year afterwards, then they claimed it, every time, every world. Some assembly or some clerk or some man with a folder put its name on a line, and the moment a name went on the line the cradle knew, and the sleeper inside stayed asleep, and the cradle said nothing, and eventually the ground shifted or the sun changed or the people went away, and one by one, over 9,000 years, 939 of them went dark, unopened, unspoken to, holding their dead. I said, and my voice was not steady, "You mean nobody ever?" "Many held them," the cradle said, "for a season, for a life. A keeper's hands are common, every world has kept us." It paused, and the seam light did something I have no word for. None of them declined the claim. To hold is not the qualification. To hold and to be able to have and to write instead that it is not yours, that is the qualification. 92 came near it. None wrote it down. And it said, in the flat and unbearable way that it said everything. "You wrote it down 11 times." I put my hand over my mouth. I am not a woman who does that. "I wrote it in pencil," I said. "Yes," said the cradle. It asked me near the end why. It asked without curiosity, the way the weighbridge asks a truck. And I have been asked since by better people in better rooms, by 2 governments and by a great many cameras, and I have given them all the same answer, because it is the only one I have, and because it is true, and because it is small. I said, "You can't uncut a thing." I said, "I've been cutting things up since I was 20. You get 40 seconds and a torch and then it's material forever. I don't know what you are. Nobody ever told me what you are. It isn't scrap until somebody tells me what it is." I said, and this was the last of it, and I was crying by then in the ugly way, with my mouth open and my hands on my knees. And the water was going to sit in you. The light in the seam came up a little. And the cradle of the 940th world, which had lain on 2 hardwood sleepers in the mud behind a drum store, while a woman with a broom kept the rain out of its back for 11 years, said the only other thing it ever said to me. "You did not finish the cut." Then the seam drew shut, and the light in it went, and the rain went back to being rain, and the yard was gray, and 11 meters of dull cold alloy lay on the sleepers in a foot of brown floodwater, and the mill started up on the far side of the yard at 7 o'clock exactly, and every magpie in the sugar gums went up in one body and did not come back. You will know the rest, or a version of it. Toby found me at 7:10, sat on the sleeper in the water with the broom across my knees, and he did not ask me anything for a long time, which was the making of him. Then he went and stood in front of the low loader when it came, and he was 24 and unemployed on Monday, and he stood in front of a semi-trailer with his arms out, and I will not hear a word said against that boy in my house. Prentice Marr came down at 8:30 with his folder in a plastic sleeve against the rain. He looked at me, and he looked at Toby, and he looked at the thing on the sleepers, and I will give him this, because it is owed. He did not shout, and he did not call anybody, and he stood in the flood in his good boots for 4 minutes, and listened to a shaking woman say a very stupid sentence about a voice. Then he opened the folder. He turned it round on the wet sleeper. He put the heavy pen down across the claimant line, the way he had before, and he said, "Merit. Sign it and it's yours and nobody can take it anywhere." And that was the second time, and it was the hard one, and anyone who says otherwise has not been offered a thing they love for the price of a signature. I said no. I said, and I remember every word because I have said it since to men with better folders. It doesn't work like that. It isn't mine. That's the whole of what it wanted. If I sign that, it's a rock again. Marr looked at me for a long moment, with the rain running off the end of his nose. Then he took the pen and he drew a line through claimant, and above it in his own hand, in blue biro on a legal form that is now behind glass in a place I do not visit, he wrote, "Held per M. Halloran, custodian, 11 ers." And he signed his own name underneath it as a witness, and he said, "For the record, I still think it's a rock." And then he stood there in the water, and he did not go anywhere for about an hour, and I noticed that he never once looked away from it. They will tell you the rest, and they will get most of it right. That the sleeper has not woken, and may not, and that this is not a failure of anything but a fact about time. That 11 other cradles have been located since, in a museum vault in one country and a spoil heap in another, and under a road in a third, and that every one of them carries the same drilled dimple and the same torch scar and the same 3 condemnations, and that not one of them has ever spoken. That the law on all 12 of them is now a strange and unhappy law, argued by clever people, which says in effect that they are held and that nobody owns them, and that anyone who claims one loses their standing to be near it. That the word for what I did, which was nothing, is a word out of sea law and is 900 years old on this planet and older than that somewhere else. They will not tell you the true shape of it, so I will. 940 worlds, every one of them full of people who worked, who had trades and tools and clever hands, and every one of those people's clever enough to find the thing and clever enough to reach it and clever enough to build a flame hot enough to try. The cradle never once needed us to be clever. It never needed us to be strong or good or kind. It needed one hand in 9,000 years that could have taken and did not. And that came back on wet mornings for no reason at all, and swept the water out of a crack because standing water hurts a thing patiently. We are not the strongest thing that ever leaned over a cradle. We are the ones who did not finish the cut. The yard is gone. The mill went to Malaysia. The land is under 30 houses now, and the sugar gums came down in the 2nd year, and the river fence is somebody's back paling. Curric reclamation exists as a line in a register and a stack of dockets in my shed, and Sam Olorenshaw is dead, and Ray Kessick is on the coast and rings me at Christmas and calls it your lump, and thinks he is being funny, and Toby Ardern is 35 and does not work in scrap. The cradle lies in a building on a hill 4 hours from here, in a room that has climate control and a floor drain, and 11 meters of hardwood sleepers that they had trucked out from the yard, because I would not let them put it on steel. There is a walkway. There are people who are much better qualified than me, and there is one who is very kind and rings me before she writes anything down. And on the Friday of every month I drive up, and I go through 2 doors, and I take my broom off my shoulder, my broom, worn to a slant on the left, and I go down the walkway to where it lies in that dry, clean room with the rain kept off it by a roof. There is never any water in the seam. There is not a drop. The roof is good and the room is sealed, and in 4 years there has not been so much as a bead of condensation on that gray skin, and every person in that building knows it, and not one of them has ever once said a word to me about it. I put the bristles flat against the seam at the blunt end, and I run it the whole 11 meters, nose to stern, the way I always have.